Welcome to Our Community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. So happy to greet again Kim and Chris Kenny from the McKinley Museum. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Always a favorite destination for our family. There's always so many fun things going on. Before we go into events themselves, there might be someone who's just moved into town and just found out that one of our favorite sons is President William McKinley.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about what we can find at the McKinley Museum.
Well, you're going to be able to find something, hopefully, that interests everybody. President McKinley was interested in science. That's one of the reasons he went to the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, and unfortunately, where he was assassinated.
Sad, yeah.
But so we have Discover World, which is our science center, on the lower level of the museum. Then on the upper floor are history galleries, where we tell the story of the community where the president lived. And, of course, we have a planetarium as well. And we have the McKinley National Memorial, where the family is actually entombed. Mm-hmm. So a lot of great things.
It is amazing, everything that's there. And like you say, truly something for everyone. Can we just go back to McKinley's life? And since you mentioned his assassination, that was, am I right, the second one? Abraham Lincoln was 1865. Was President McKinley's in 1901 the second one? Or
this was actually the third.
Third one.
So in an adult's lifespan, mm-hmm. in a matter of about 35 years or so, you had three presidents assassinated. You had Lincoln, and then you had Garfield, and then you had William McKinley.
So two of those from Ohio.
Right.
That's just crazy.
Yes.
And I never was able to understand, so I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Why? What was it? I know the man who shot McKinley, Leon.
Yeah, Leon Czolgosz.
How do you say that last name?
Czolgosz.
Czolgosz. Mm-hmm. And he was an
anarchist.
An anarchist. What did McKinley do that made this anarchist so upset with him?
McKinley personally didn't do really anything. Anarchists and Leon specifically saw the office of presidency as a threat to the common person. Leon and his father had been out of work during the Depression in 1893, and he blamed the government for that. And this was a pretty strong sentiment during this late 19th, early 20th century, this idea of anarchy. There had been political and religious figures in Europe that had been assassinated, and the ideas made their way over into this country. And Leon subscribed to those theories and thought that the best way to prove to everyone what his beliefs were was to assassinate the president. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some that think that perhaps he was anti-imperialist as well. And, of course, under McKinley, we acquired Puerto Rico and the Philippines and Guam and Hawaii. So there's some that think that may have played into it a bit, but the majority of it was this idea of anarchy.
Government in general.
Right.
If we could compare William McKinley to any more modern-day president, who would he be most like?
You know, that would be tough to name a more modern president because William McKinley was a Republican. His platforms and ideologies in the Republican parties sort of flipped in later periods. So his ideologies in thinking and policies would probably more closely resemble what we would think of as the Democratic Party today. So I can't really say for sure who I would link him to.
He was all his own person.
He was, and certainly some of his policies and some of the tariff issue, for example, that was so important to him, are more contemporary issues today, and the same questions that were raised during his time are being raised again today. So many of the same ideas are still
being
prominent and being discussed today, but as far as likening him to a more modern president, I can't really think of one offhand.
Hard to do because times change. Everything changes, but nothing's different.
Exactly.
or
Yeah,
everything's different
that's
and
a great
nothing
way of,
changes. But
Yep. That's a great way of pointing
someone might say, wow, I wish there was a book about him that I could read. Do you happen to know of one of those, Chris?
There's a couple of great books, and one is the one that I did in 2016, I think
Absolutely,
it was. And that one takes a look at McKinley as both not only a president, but as a person. And there's a lot of great archival images in that. But there's also a really great book that came out last year, 2017, written by Robert Mary. And it really does a fantastic job of looking in depth at some of the issues, not some, but most of the issues that William McKinley was facing. And anyone that reads that book, I think, will see similarities in some of the same types of questions that are being raised today about certain issues that happen to be the same. So both of those books you can get at the museum shop.
Awesome.
So that benefits the museum. But those are a couple of ones that have come out in the last couple of years.
Highly recommend yours.
Thank you.
So good. One of the neat things about President William McKinley was he was so devoted to his wife, Ida. And Kim, that's why we want to talk to you about some girly things. And that have more to do maybe with Ida McKinley. You've got a really fun exhibit happening now, right?
Yes. It opened May 11th. It's open through October 21st. It's an exhibit of 20th century hats from our collection. So we have over 600 hats, but we had to choose 50. Our guest curator was Kathy Fleer. She's one of my volunteers, and she loves hats and has been working on dating our collection for several years. And so I approached her last year and said, let's do an exhibit. And so she did it, and there were some tough decisions, but we got it down to 50. And people will, kind of our theory behind it was to imagine the personality of the person who might have chosen these hats. And there are some really lovely ones, some that are very outrageous, but a lot of fun.
Well, I think if President McKinley was president up until 1901, he was the first 20th century president. Yes? Do we consider him that?
Oh, yes.
So these hats, 20th century, you are starting as early as 1901? Are any that old?
We have a few from around 1900, and it goes right through the 1990s. There's just a couple from the more modern era because people really stopped wearing hats in the 1960s was kind of the last era. So in the 1970s, people didn't wear hats anymore.
Kim, let's do something about that. Can we? Why did people stop wearing hats when you think how great of an accessory that is?
It was a general kind of relaxing of fashion that's happening across the board. And as we sort of lose that formality, I mean, you used to get dressed up to get on a plane.
Yes.
You wouldn't go to the grocery store without your hat and gloves.
True.
And as life starts to become more relaxed, for better or for worse, we let some of that stuff go. And hats are one of the casualties of that.
But it takes no longer to put on something nice than to put on something ratty.
Yes.
It takes the same
That's
amount
true.
of time. And you can put on a baseball cap, then you can certainly put on a really cute hat.
It's true.
That's my thinking. Let's just bring it back. And maybe your exhibit is the first part of it.
Maybe.
So what will we see there? Do women, first of all, are people wearing hats to come see it?
They did, yes, to the opening. People
Yes.
almost, I would say more people had hats that didn't have hats.
That's
so that
cool.
was great. So that's, the hats are just such a fun part. And I try to do something fun for the summer. So that was, our out-of-town visitors want to, they want to learn about McKinley, but they might want something a little lighthearted too. And for locals to bring their guests, for summer vacations and stuff
Oh my
too.
goodness, yes. And this will be taking place all summer long through October, yes?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So fun. Well, I'll be wearing a hat when I come see it. And there's no question about that. What ones have you, 50. You had some real hard decisions to make. What ones stood out to you? What were some of your favorites that we can look forward to seeing?
We have one that has Lily of the Valley hanging all over it. And so you can't see it moving, of course, in the case. But the woman who wore it would have been kind of jiggling through, because they're all kind of around her face and around the crown of the hat. There are a couple. We have an actual raspberry beret. So if you're a fan of the Prince song, there is a raspberry beret in the exhibit. It was very exciting to see we had one of those.
Too.
And of course we have the Easter bonnets that are, very large hats, lots of tulle, lots of flowers, just really works of art. Each one is different and unique, and we have all different colors and all different styles, and there's feathers and there's flowers and there's, little fruits and all kinds of stuff.
I miss it. I'm just really bummed that I wasn't in that era. I mean, when I was a very little girl, I was, and
Sure.
we always wore hats,
Sure.
hats and muffs. That was the order of the day.
Well, and we hope maybe people's interest in hats will be piqued with the
Yes.
wedding coming up here in a few days,
You name it.
and
That's
Great
right.
Britain, for the royalty, they bring out the hats, and that is much a part of why people watch, I think.
Oh,
As
exactly.
who is getting married. So this,
It never left in Britain.
No.
They
It
have
didn't.
continued to wear hats.
Good
and in
for
America,
them.
we just don't do it.
No. Well, we'll see if we can't turn that around. I really, really want to.
Right.
Because I
Right here in
love
Canton,
hats.
Ohio.
You know it. That's right. It'll be known as, oh, you're going to Canton? Oh, wear a hat.
yeah.
I want to be known for that. All right. You've got some other fun things like feminine fashions.
Yes, we have 2 Teas with the Curator coming up. The one on June 18th is Feminine Fashion, and it's a fashion timeline. It's a program that I do that talks about the evolution of fashion in this country from colonial days through the 1980s, pretty much is where I stop. The other one is on July 30th, and that one is about the Ida McKinley Dress Project. So we have identified 20 gowns of hers in our collection that are worthy of conservation treatment. And 5 of them are back and have had all the work done. And then we've got funding for, I think, 13 of them. So we're still looking for funding for 7. And her gowns are gorgeous. They are what you would expect a first lady to have worn. And the ones that are done are going to be out. We're not getting them out of the box, but people will be able to come right up to them and look at them. And then the program is going to be about her life and her fashion sense and her style. She was criticized, speaking of political things earlier, she was criticized because her inaugural gown had silver embroidery. And one of McKinley's platforms was the gold standard. So there were lots of articles written about how dare she wear silver embroidery in her inaugural gown. So there's lots of fun stuff to talk about with Ida and her clothing.
Again, nothing changes, right?
No.
You
That's
just
true.
cannot.
You think politics is only mean now, and it really was, it's
No.
always been terrible.
No, it's always been mean. I think we're seeing a lot now that really relates back to many, many years ago. Some of these shouting matches sound like what we read those early Congresses
Yes.
to be like. And it's sort of like we've gone full circle and everybody's at each other's throats again.
Right,
So
right.
there we
Yeah.
go. But let's talk a little bit about Ida McKinley. She had such a sad life.
Yes.
Very, very privileged young lady, off to a great start, married, handsome. Let's face it, William McKinley, those young pictures of him, he looks like a movie star.
He does.
He does.
And there she was marrying Major McKinley. Boy, there's a young power couple that looks like they're off to a great start. And then, wow, one tragedy after another.
Yeah.
Can you talk about her a little bit?
She, in her later life, she's what we would kind of call a semi-invalid. So after the deaths of her children, her mother, and her grandfather, at kind of within a few years, she just never recovered from that. She had gone to Europe as a young lady, and we have her letters back. She was very vivacious. She was, challenging the chaperone about, fair payment of things, and she was really outspoken. And then she was sort of never was able to get past the tragedies in her life, but always supported her husband in everything that he did. And so she went to Columbus with him when he was governor. They were in Washington when he was congressman, followed him around and supported him, and was very vocal privately about her opinions. But she was definitely kind of a underdog kind of figure in that she would have liked to have done more, and she did what she could when she was able. And a lot of people think, oh, she was sick, she was always in bed, she was never out. She was. She would go to certain events at the White House, but she'd usually be sitting down. She'd usually have flowers in her hand, so she didn't have to shake hands. She would retire early often, but she did attend things, so she wasn't this kind of sickly woman, but there is always a sadness about her.
Such a sadness. And she would have some kinds of seizures or some kinds of episodes where he would just cover her face with a napkin until it was over.
He was also very devoted to her. And at a state dinner, for example, if she started having a seizure, he would put a napkin over her face, and he expected everybody to carry on as if nothing had happened because he wanted her not to be embarrassed and all of that. So it was a kind of a love story for the ages because they were so devoted to each other. And when he was assassinated, she really went into a very deep depression, and then she died 6 years later. So, she didn't recover from that either.
This is a very sad place to take a break, but
Yeah.
we're going to have to take a break. We'll come back and talk about happier times after these words. You're listening to Our Community.